Stoicism explains why men should shave their heads. Why going bald terrifies most men. Imagine waking up tomorrow morning, looking in the mirror, and realizing your hairline has moved back just a little more. At first, you convince yourself it's the lighting. Maybe your hair is just wet. Maybe you're imagining it. But over the following months, the evidence becomes harder to ignore. You start checking old photographs. You avoid certain angles. Perhaps you spend a little longer styling your hair. You begin researching treatments, special shampoos, hair fibers, supplements, maybe even surgery. It's remarkable when you stop to think about it. A few thousand strands of hair, something with no ability to think, speak, or feel, can dramatically influence a man's confidence, relationships, and even his identity. Why? Because hair has never been just hair. For thousands of years, it symbolized youth, strength, attractiveness, power, and status. Lose it, and many men feel they're losing part of themselves. Entire industries have been built around this fear. The global hair restoration market is worth billions of dollars and pounds. Advertisements promise thicker hair. Celebrity endorsements suggest confidence can be bought. Social media constantly presents images of perfect appearances. The message is subtle but relentless. But over 2,000 years ago, long before hair transplants, Instagram filters, or expensive grooming products existed, a group of philosophers often offered a radically different perspective. They didn't ask, how do I stop losing my hair? They asked something far more powerful. Why am I afraid of losing it in the first place? Those philosophers were the Stoics. And while Stoicism never instructed men to shave their heads the way Buddhist monks often do, it did teach something that may be even more challenging. It taught that your peace of mind should never depend on something nature can take away. Hair, youth, beauty, status, money, popularity, all of these are temporary. Character is not. Today we're going to explore what might seem like an unusual topic. What can going bald teach us about Stoicism? But this isn't really a story about hair. It's a story about freedom. Because once you understand how the Stoics viewed boldness, you'll begin to notice that many of the things we worry about every day share the same root. We fear rejection, we fear aging, we fear looking different, we fear losing status, we fear other people's opinions, and perhaps most of all, we fear change. The Stoics believe that these fears don't arise because life is cruel. They arise because we've attached our happiness to things we never truly controlled. That single idea has the potential to transform not only how you think about your appearance, but how you think about your entire life. Let's perform a simple thought experiment. Imagine two men. The first notices he's going bald. He spends years trying to hide it. He worries every time someone looks at his forehead. He avoids windy days because he exposes thinning hair. Every photograph becomes a source of anxiety. Every birthday feels like another reminder that time is winning. Now imagine a second man. One morning, he notices the same receding hairline. He smiles, walks into the bathroom, picks up a razor, and shaves his head completely. Not because he has given up, but because he has decided that his confidence will no longer depend on his hairstyle. Which man is freer? The Stoics would argue the answer is obvious. Freedom isn't having perfect hair. Freedom is no longer needing perfect hair. That distinction changes everything. One of the greatest Stoic philosophers, Epictetus, was born a slave. He owned almost nothing. He had little control over his circumstances, yet he became one of history's greatest teachers of inner freedom. His philosophy can be summarized in one simple principle. Some things are within our control. Most things are not. Our opinions, within our control. Our choices, within our control. Our character, within our control. Whether our hair starts thinning at 25 or 55, not entirely within our control. Nature will eventually make its own decision. The question is whether we'll spend years fighting reality or learning to live well within it. This is when Stoicism begins, not with surrender, but with clarity. Think about how much mental energy modern life encourages to invest in appearance. We compare ourselves with strangers online, we analyze photographs of ourselves, We wonder what other people think. We spend fortunes trying to preserve youth. Yet despite all this effort, one undeniable truth remains. Time always wins. Hair turns grey, skin wrinkles, strength declines. Eventually every human being grows older. The Stoics didn't see this as depressing. They saw it as liberating. Because once you stop fighting the inevitable, you recover enormous amounts of emotional energy. Imagine no longer worrying about something you cannot ultimately control. Imagine redirecting that energy toward becoming wiser, kinder, braver, more disciplined. Wouldn't that be a better investment? Marcus Aurelius certainly thought so. The Roman emperor ruled one of the largest empires in history. He possessed wealth beyond imagination, power beyond imagination. Yet in his private journal, what we now know as meditations, he rarely wrote about appearances. Instead, he constantly reminded himself of something much deeper. You could leave life right now. That wasn't pessimism. It was perspective. Marcus wasn't obsessed with how long his hair would last. He was concerned with how well he used the time he had. It's an extraordinary shift in priorities, one that becomes surprisingly relevant every time we look in the mirror. Perhaps the greatest irony is this. Many men believe losing their hair makes them less masculine. History suggests the opposite. Some of history's most respected leaders, athletes, military commanders, philosophers, and entrepreneurs have been bold. What made them memorable wasn't their hairstyle, it was their character. People rarely remember Socrates for his appearance. They remember his wisdom. Few admire Marcus Aurelius because of his grooming. They admire his resilience. Even today, the people who command the most respect often possess something far more compelling than perfect looks. They possess presence, calm, confidence, integrity, qualities that no razor can remove. And that's precisely where the Stoics invite us to focus, not on decorating the outside, but on strengthening the inside. As we'll discover, the ancient Stoics didn't ignore appearance because they thought it was unimportant. They ignored it because they believed something infinitely more valuable deserved our attention. They believed the greatest achievement wasn't preserving youth, it was cultivating virtue, not becoming admired, but becoming admirable. And once you understand that distinction, you'll never look at a bald head in quite the same way again. Because sometimes the moment we stop trying to control what nature is doing is the very moment we begin controlling ourselves. And that, according to the Stoics, is where real freedom begins. What the Stoics really thought about appearance. If you've ever searched online for what the Stoics thought about boldness, you might be surprised. There isn't a chapter in meditation titled How to Deal with Hair Loss. Seneca never wrote an essay called The Philosophy of Going Bold. And Epictetus certainly didn't spend hours discussing hairstyles. Instead, they did something far more interesting. They asked a deeper question. Not how do I stop losing my hair, but why should losing my hair have the power to disturb my peace? That difference may seem subtle, but it changes everything, because the Stoics believed that almost every emotional struggle begins the same way. Not with the event itself, but with the meaning we attach to it. Imagine two men standing side by side. Both notice their hair is thinning. One sees a catastrophe, the other sees biology. The first man becomes anxious, the second remains calm. What changed? Not their hair, their judgment. This was one of Epictetus' greatest insights. He famously taught, it's not things themselves that disturb us, but our opinions about them. Think about that for a moment. Hair doesn't contain anxiety. A mirror doesn't contain insecurity. A receding hairline doesn't contain shame. Those emotions are created inside the mind. And if the mind creates them, the mind can also learn to release them. That was the Stoic project. Not changing the world, changing the way we relate to it. The Stoic dichotomy of control. Perhaps the most famous idea in Stoicism is something called the dichotomy of control. It sounds complicated, it's actually very simple. The Stoics divided life into two categories. The first contains things you can control, your choices, your effort, your honesty, your discipline, your kindness. The second contains everything else. Other people's opinions, the weather, the economy, aging, illness, death, and yes, whether genetics decides your hairline should begin retreating before your 30th birthday. Now here's where the Stoics become incredibly practical. They argued that suffering often begins when we confuse these two categories. We spend enormous energy trying to control what isn't ours to control. Imagine standing on a beach shouting at the tide, "Come back!" No matter how passionate your argument is, the ocean isn't listening. Yet many of us do something similar every day. We fight aging, we fight time, we fight reality itself. The Stoics gently ask, what if your energy could be spent somewhere more meaningful? Seneca's lesson on beauty. Seneca, the Roman statesman and philosopher, lived among extraordinary wealth. He saw people devote fortunes to luxury, appearance, and social status. And he noticed something fascinating. No matter how much people are possessed, they always seem to want more. More beauty, more admiration, more youth, more prestige. Sound familiar? 2,000 years later, not much has changed. The products are different, the psychology is the same. Seneca warned against building happiness on anything temporary, because temporary things eventually disappear. Imagine spending decades constructing your identity around being attractive, then one morning, grey hair appears, wrinkles appear, hair begins falling out. If appearance is your foundation, life becomes terrifying. Every birthday feels like bad news, but if your foundation is wisdom or kindness or courage, then time has much less power over you. In fact, those qualities often grow stronger with age. That's why Seneca believed the truly beautiful person wasn't necessarily the one with the perfect face. It was the one with the excellent character. Beauty attracts attention. Character earns respect. One fades, the other often deepens. Marcus Aurelius and nature. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire stretching across 3 continents. If anyone had reason to obsess over image, it was him. Roman emperors carefully managed how they appeared to the public. Statues portrayed them as powerful, strong, almost godlike. Yet Marcus spent surprisingly little time thinking about appearances. Instead, he constantly reflected on nature. He believed everything in the universe follows a natural process. Leaves fall, seasons change, children become adults, adults become old, hair grows, hair turns grey, hair falls out. To resist these changes is like becoming angry that autumn follows summer. Nature isn't attacking you, nature is simply being nature. Marcus wrote that we should love the process rather than resent it. Today, psychologists sometimes call this radical acceptance. Marcus simply called it living according to nature. It's one of the hardest ideas in Stoicism, because acceptance is often misunderstood. Acceptance does not mean liking everything that happens. It means recognizing reality before deciding how to respond. If it's raining, you can complain, or you can carry an umbrella. Complaining doesn't stop the rain. Likewise, denying reality doesn't stop aging. But actual reality allows you to live wisely within it. Julius Caesar, a lesson in attachment. Now here's an interesting historical contrast. Julius Caesar wasn't a Stoic. In fact, ancient historians tell us he was deeply self-conscious about his receding hairline. He reportedly combed his thinning hair forward to conceal it whenever possible. He greatly appreciated the honour of wearing a laurel wreath, partly because it covered the top of his head. Think about that, one of history's greatest military commanders, the conqueror of Gaul, the man who crossed the Rubicon, still worried about what people thought of his hair. It reminds us that insecurity doesn't disappear with success. You can conquer nations and still be conquered by your own ego. That's a profound Stoic observation, because external success never guarantees internal peace. Only philosophy can do that. Musonius Rufus, train the mind, not the mirror. One Stoic philosopher who deserves far more attention is Musonius Rufus. He taught that people spend too much time improving things that matter least. They polish the outside while neglecting the inside. Imagine owning a magnificent ship, beautiful paint, golden decorations, perfect sails, but the hull beneath the water is rotten. Would you feel safe sailing it? Of course not. The appearance means nothing if the foundation is weak. Musonius believed human beings often make the same mistake. We polish appearances but neglect integrity. We strengthen our bodies but ignore our character. We decorate the mirror instead of educating the mind. This doesn't mean the Stoics opposed grooming or cleanliness. Quite the opposite. They believed in self-respect. but they drew a clear distinction between caring for appearance and becoming emotionally dependent upon it. There's nothing wrong with looking your best. The danger begins when your happiness depends on looking your best. The bald head as a stoic exercise, learning to let go of ego. Imagine standing in front of a mirror with a pair of electric clippers in your hand. You haven't lost all your hair. In fact, you could probably keep hiding the thinning spots for another year or two. You could change your hairstyle, use styling products, wear hats, hope no one notices. Instead, you take a deep breath, you switch on the clippers. The familiar buzzing fills the room. And with the first pass across your head, something unexpected happens. It's not just your hair that's falling into the sink, it's fear. One stroke at a time. At least that's how a Stoic might see it. Because although Stoicism never required anyone to shave their head, it frequently encouraged people to confront the things they feared instead of running from them. To the Stoics, avoiding discomfort doesn't make us stronger. It makes our fear stronger. Every time we hide something, we silently tell our minds, this thing has power over me. But every time we face it willingly, that power begins to disappear. The shaved head becomes much more than a hairstyle. It becomes a declaration. I refuse to let this define me. Voluntary discomfort. One of the most fascinating practices in Stoicism is something called voluntary discomfort. Seneca recommended that from time to time people should deliberately experience hardship, even if they didn't have to. He suggested wearing simple clothing, sleeping on a hard bed, eating plain food, not because comfort is wrong, but because dependence on comfort is dangerous. He wrote that we should occasionally ask ourselves, is this what I feared? Think about that. Instead of waiting for life to force discomfort upon you, the Stoics practice choosing it. Why? Because chosen discomfort teaches us that we're stronger than we imagined. Now apply that idea to appearance. Many men spend years fearing boldness. Some constantly worry that other people will notice. Others avoid swimming because their wet hair reveals thinning patches. Some refuse to stand under the bright lights. Others panic every time the wind blows. Notice what's happening. The hair isn't controlling their life. The fear is. From a Stoic perspective, that fear has quietly become a form of slavery. Not slavery to hair, slavery to opinion. And the Stoics believed freedom begins the moment you stop allowing external things to dictate your inner peace. The difference between confidence and validation. Modern culture often confuses confidence with admiration. We're told confidence comes from looking attractive, owning expensive things, receiving compliments, being admired. But the Stoics saw confidence very differently. Imagine two men entering a crowded room. The first spends the evening wondering, does everyone like me? The second spends the evening asking, am I treating people well? One seeks validation, the other practices virtue. One depends on the crowd, the other depends on his character. Who's more confident? The answer seems obvious. Real confidence isn't waiting for strangers to approve of you. It's knowing your value remains intact whether they do or not. That's why shaving your head, especially when you're nervous about doing so, can become a surprisingly powerful psychological exercise. It forces you to ask, who am I when I stop managing everyone else's opinion of me? That's an uncomfortable question, but it's also an incredibly liberating one. Ego hates simplicity. The Stoics rarely use the word ego in the same way modern psychology does, but they understood the concept well. Ego constantly wants reassurance. It wants praise, recognition, admiration. It whispers, people must think highly of me. I need to look impressive. I can't let anyone see my flaws. But here's the strange thing about ego. No matter how much attention it receives, it's never satisfied. One compliment isn't enough. Neither are 10. Approval quickly becomes addictive. The Stoics recognized this long before social media existed. Today it's easier than ever to feed the ego. Every notification, every like, every flattering comment, every photograph carefully edited before posting. None of these things are inherently bad. The problem begins when our emotional well-being depends on them. Imagine waking up every morning needing hundreds of strangers to confirm your worth. That's exhausting. The Stoics wanted something better. They wanted self-respect. Self-respect doesn't require applause. It doesn't disappear when someone criticizes you. It isn't strengthened by compliments. It's built through living according to your principles, whether anyone notices or not. The barber's chair. There's an old story often told in Stoic circles. Imagine sitting in a barber's chair. The barber accidentally gives you an uneven haircut. How do you react? Do you become furious, embarrassed, ashamed? Or do you smile, realizing that your peace was never supposed to depend on your hairstyle? The Stoics would argue that this tiny moment reveals something much larger. Small inconveniences expose larger attachments. Hair is just the beginning. If losing a hairstyle ruins your day, what happens when life presents genuine hardship, illness, financial loss, failure, bereavement? The Stoics believed we should train ourselves using life's smaller challenges so that we become stronger when larger ones inevitably arrive. A shaved head becomes one such exercise. Not because hair matters enormously, but because our reaction to it teaches us about ourselves. Exposure instead of avoidance. Modern psychology has discovered something fascinating. One of the most effective treatments for many fears is exposure. Instead of endlessly avoiding what frightens us, we gradually face it. Someone afraid of public speaking speaks to small groups. Someone afraid of height slowly climbs higher. Someone anxious about social situations practices engaging with people. Why? Because avoidance feeds fear. Exposure weakens it. The Stoics understood this intuitively. If you're terrified of appearing bold, what happens after you've walked outside with a shaved head for a few weeks? People glance at you, then they continue with their lives. You realize something surprising. Most people aren't thinking about you nearly as much as you imagined. And even if they are, so what? Epictetus would likely ask, are their opinions under your control? No. Then why surrender your peace to them? Becoming unmistakably yourself. Perhaps the most beautiful lesson hidden in the entire discussion is authenticity. Many people spend years trying to become someone they think others will admire. The Stoics took the opposite approach. Become someone you admire. Imagine looking in the mirror with a shaved head and saying, "This is me." No disguises, no pretending, no hiding behind clever hairstyles or carefully managed appearances. Just honesty. There's tremendous strength in that. Marcus Aurelius repeatedly reminded himself not to waste time worrying about appearances. Instead, he asked himself each day, have I acted with wisdom? Have I been just? Have I shown courage? Those questions don't change whether you have thick hair, thin hair, or no hair at all. The unexpected freedom. Here's what surprises many people. The moment they finally shave their heads, the fear often disappears. Not because they've become more attractive, not because everyone suddenly approves, but because uncertainty has ended. They've stopped negotiating with reality. They've accepted it, and acceptance creates clarity. It's as if they've been carrying a heavy backpack for years without realizing it. The weight wasn't the hair, the weight was the constant worrying, the constant hiding, the constant pretending. Once those disappear, life becomes lighter. This isn't really about boldness, it's about every unnecessary burden we carry, the need to impress, the need to appear successful, the need to seem perfect, the need to avoid criticism. The Stoics gently ask, how much of your life is spent protecting an image instead of strengthening your character? That's a difficult question, but it might also be one of the most important questions you'll ever ask. Because in the end, the goal of Stoicism isn't to become bold, it's to become free. Free from fear, free from ego, free from the opinions that quietly control our lives. And once you experience even a small taste of that freedom, you begin to realize something extraordinary. Perhaps the thing you were afraid of losing was never the thing that truly mattered. What modern psychology says, why letting go makes you stronger. For centuries, Stoicism has often dismissed as little more than ancient philosophy. Interesting, wise perhaps, but outdated. After all, what could Roman philosophers possibly know about the pressures of the modern world? They never had smartphones. They never dealt with social media. They never had dating apps, high-definition cameras, or a culture where people compare themselves with strangers every single day. And yet, the more psychologists study the human mind, the more they discover something remarkable. Many of the principles the Stoics taught over 2,000 years ago are now supported by modern science. Not because science sets out to prove Stoicism right, but because it is set out to understand what makes human beings resilient. And resilience, it turns out, has surprisingly little to do with having perfect circumstances. It has everything to do with how we respond to imperfect ones. That brings us back to something as simple as shaving your head. At first glance, it seems like a cosmetic decision, but psychologically, it can become something much deeper. It can become a decision about identity. The story we tell ourselves. Psychologists often talk about something called self-concept. Simply put, it's the story we tell ourselves about who we are. I'm successful, I'm attractive, I'm intelligent, I'm athletic, I'm funny. None of these are necessarily bad. The problem begins when our identity depends entirely on one of them. Imagine a man whose confidence depends on being handsome. What happens as he ages? Imagine another whose identity depends on being the strongest person in the gym. What happens after an injury? Or imagine someone whose self-worth depends on having a full head of hair. What happens when genetics has other plans? If our identity is built on something fragile, then our confidence becomes fragile too. The Stoics understood this instinctively. They encouraged people to build identity around virtues that cannot be stolen. Wisdom, integrity, justice, self-control, kindness, courage. Notice something interesting. No one can take those away without your permission. Hair can disappear. Character is a choice. The spotlight effect. Here's another fascinating discovery from psychology. Researchers describe something known as a spotlight effect. It's a tendency to believe other people are paying far more attention to us than they actually are. Have you ever spilled coffee on your shirt before an important meeting? Suddenly you feel as though everyone is staring at the stain. In reality, most people either don't notice or forget about it within minutes. The same happens with appearance. Many men believe everyone notices their thinning hair, that strangers are silently judging them. Every conversation begins with someone thinking, he's going bald. But here's the truth. Most people are far too busy worrying about themselves. They're thinking about their own insecurities, their own deadlines, their own families, their own appearance. We're all starring in our own movie. Very few people spend much time analysing someone else's hairstyle. Realising this can be incredibly freeing. It reminds us that the prison often exists in our own imagination. The confidence paradox. Now here's something that surprises many psychologists. Confidence rarely comes before action. It usually comes after it. Think back to the first time you learned to drive. You probably weren't confident. Confidence appears after practice. The same is true for public speaking, exercise, starting a business, learning a language. Confidence isn't the prerequisite, it's the reward. Yet many people wait until they feel confident before making changes. I'll shave my head when I feel ready. I'll speak up when I stop being nervous. I'll start that project once I believe in myself. The Stoics would gently challenge that thinking. They would say, the action creates the confidence, not the other way around. Sometimes courage comes first. Confidence follows quietly behind. Exposure therapy in Stoicism. One of the most effective treatments for anxiety is something psychologists call exposure therapy. Instead of endlessly avoiding what frightens us, we face it gradually, repeatedly. Imagine someone terrified of flying. Avoiding planes doesn't eliminate the fear, it strengthens it. Each avoided flight confirms the mind's belief that flying is dangerous. The same principle applies to social fears. If you're terrified of people seeing your bald head, every hat you wear reinforces the fear. Every hairstyle designed to hide it sends your brain the same message. This must be dangerous. But once you face it, something remarkable happens. The fear begins to shrink, not overnight, but steadily. This is almost identical to what the Stoics practice through voluntary discomfort. Face the thing you fear, discover that you survive, become stronger because of it. The burden of comparison. Perhaps no generation in history has compared itself more than ours. Open your phone, within minutes you'll see people with perfect vacations, perfect bodies, perfect careers, perfect homes, perfect hair. At least that's what it looks like. The problem isn't that successful people exist. The problem is that comparison has become constant. Researchers have linked excessive social comparison to increased anxiety, depression, and lower self-esteem. The Stoics would hardly be surprised. Marcus Aurelius repeatedly reminded himself not to become distracted by what other people possessed. Instead, he focused on becoming the best version of himself. Imagine running a marathon. Now imagine spending the entire race looking sideways instead of forward. How well would you perform? Comparison does exactly that. It steals attention from your own journey. The shaved head, surprisingly, can become a rejection of that game. Instead of asking, how do I compare? You begin asking, am I living according to my values? One question produces anxiety, the other produces growth. Authenticity is attractive. Here's another fascinating insight from modern psychology. People are naturally drawn to authenticity, not perfection, authenticity. Think about the people you trust most. Are they flawless? Probably not. They're genuine, comfortable with themselves, honest about their imperfections. There's something deeply reassuring about people who no longer pretend. The Stoics aim for exactly this. Not perfection, authenticity. A shaved head can sometimes symbolize that authenticity. It says, I'm not hiding, I'm not pretending, this is who I am. Ironically, many people discover that accepting themselves makes them appear more confident than endless attempts to conceal themselves ever did. Minimalism and mental space. There's one final connection between Stoicism and modern psychology worth exploring: minimalism. Researchers have found that physical clutter often contributes to mental clutter. The more necessary things competing for our attention, the harder it becomes to focus. While shaving your head doesn't magically simplify your life, it can become part of a larger philosophy. Owning fewer unnecessary possessions, needing fewer external validations, spending less time managing appearances, spending more time developing skills, relationships, purpose. Imagine recovering just 30 minutes every morning because you're no longer worrying about how your hair looks. Now imagine using those 30 minutes to read, exercise, meditate, write, learn. Over 10 years, that's thousands of hours redirected from appearance toward growth. The Stoics would call that an excellent trade. The strongest men in the room. When people hear the word strength, they often imagine physical power. The Stoics imagine something else entirely. The strongest man in the room isn't necessarily the biggest, or the richest, or the best looking. It's the one who remains calm when others panic, the one who acts with integrity when no one is watching, the one who accepts criticism without becoming defensive, the one who loses his hair yet never loses his dignity. Because dignity was never growing from his scalp, it was growing from his character. And that's perhaps the greatest lesson psychology and Stoicism now share. Our lives improve not when we become perfect, but when we stop believing perfection is required. Confidence isn't found in flawless appearances, it's found in wholehearted acceptance of reality and the courage to live well within it. Which brings us to the final and perhaps the most practical part of this journey. Because even if you never shave your head, even if you have a full head of hair for the rest of your life, the Stoics believe there are timeless lessons hidden within this simple idea. Lessons about courage, about freedom, about dignity, and about becoming the kind of person whose confidence comes from within rather than from the mirror. 10 Stoic lessons we can all learn from a bald head. We spent the last previous chapters talking about something that on the surface seems incredibly ordinary. A man looks in the mirror, he picks up a razor, he shaves his head. At first it sounds like a conversation about appearance, but as the Stoics would remind us, appearance are really the real story. The real story is always happening inside the mind, because shaving your head doesn't automatically make you courageous. It doesn't instantly make you wise, and it certainly doesn't make you a Stoic. What it can become is a powerful reminder. A reminder that the greatest battles we fight are not against nature, they're against our own attachments. So whether you have a full head of hair, a receding hairline, or you've been shaving your head for years, here are 10 Stoic lessons that can make life richer, calmer, and far more meaningful. Lesson 1. Stop fighting nature. Marcus Aurelius wrote that everything in nature has its reasons, has its seasons. Leaves fall, rivers flow, the sun rises and sets. Children grow into adults, adults grow old, hair grows, hair falls out. The problem isn't that nature changes, the problem is that we often expect it not to. Think about how much suffering comes from arguing with reality. I shouldn't be getting older. I shouldn't have wrinkles. I shouldn't be losing my hair. Nature never promised otherwise. The Stoic doesn't waste energy demanding that autumn becomes spring. He learns to appreciate each season for what it is. Life becomes much lighter when we stop treating natural change as a personal insult. Lesson 2. Your character is your greatest asset. Imagine two men. One has perfect hair but constantly lies, cheats, and breaks promises. The other is completely bold but is honest, dependable, generous, and courageous. Which one would you trust? Which one would you want as a friend? Which one would you want your children to admire? The answer is obvious. Yet many of us spend our time improving our appearance than improving our character. The Stoics flip those priorities. Hair may attract attention. Character earns lasting respect. And unlike appearance, character improves with deliberate effort. Lesson 3. Confidence comes from action. Many people believe confidence is something you're born with. The Stoics disagreed. Confidence grows through repeated courageous actions. You become brave by acting bravely. You become disciplined by practicing discipline. You become confident by doing the things you've been avoiding. Perhaps that's why so many men say shaving their head felt strangely empowering. It wasn't because they suddenly became more attractive. It was because they finally stopped negotiating with fear. Every courageous action quietly tells your mind, I can handle more than I thought. That lesson extends far beyond appearance. Apply for the job, start the business, speak the truth, make the difficult phone call. Don't wait for confidence, build it. Lesson 4. Other people's opinions are borrowed weather. Imagine waking up every morning and checking the weather forecast. Sunny, cloudy, rain, storm. Now imagine allowing the weather to determine your self-worth. It sounds absurd. Yet many of us do exactly that with other people's opinions. Someone compliments us, we feel valuable. Someone criticizes us, we feel worthless. The Stoics remind us that opinions belong to the people who hold them. They're not facts, they're not your identity, they are passing weather. Don't build your house on clouds. Lesson 5. Practice voluntary discomfort. One of Seneca's greatest teachings was simple. Occasionally make life harder on purpose. Walk instead of driving. Take a cold shower. Spend a day without unnecessary luxuries. Eat a simple meal. Why? Because comfort is wonderful. Until we become dependent on it. The person who needs perfect conditions to remain happy is incredibly fragile. The person who can remain calm almost anywhere possesses genuine strength. A shaved head can symbolize that willingness to embrace discomfort instead of fearing it. Growth rarely happens inside comfort zones. Lesson 6. Simplicity creates clarity. Look around your home. How many possessions truly improve your life? How many simply demand attention? Modern life constantly encourages accumulation. More clothes, more gadgets, more subscriptions, more notifications, more commitments. The Stoics preferred simplicity, not because owning things is wrong, but because every unnecessary possession quietly asks for your time, energy, and attention. The same is true of mental clutter, old resentments, constant comparison, the need to impress. Imagine shaving those away just as easily as hair. How much lighter would life feel? Lesson 7. Train the mind every day. No one becomes physically fit by exercising once a year. The same is true of the mind. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his journal almost every day, not because he was already wise, but because wisdom requires practice. The Stoics trained their minds through daily reflection. They reviewed their mistakes, prepared for challenges, practiced gratitude, strengthened discipline. Hair requires maintenance, so does character. One neglected for too long begins to weaken. Lesson 8. Success means living according to your values. Society often defines success through wealth, status, appearance, recognition. Stoics had a different definition. Success means becoming the person you intended to be. You can possess millions and fail morally. You can own very little and live an extraordinary life. The question isn't, how impressive do I look? The question is, am I becoming someone I respect? The answer matters far more than any hairstyle ever could. Lesson 9. Freedom begins where attachment ends. This may be the most important lesson of all. The Stoics believe that whatever controls your emotions controls you. If compliments control your happiness, you are dependent on compliments. If appearances determine your confidence, you are dependent on appearances. If possessions define your worth, you are dependent on possessions. Freedom begins when these dependencies weaken. Notice that freedom isn't having everything. Freedom is no longer needing everything. That's a profound difference. The bold head simply becomes a visible reminder of an invisible truth. Nothing outside your soul should possess the power to define your peace. Lesson 10. Memento mori. Remember you will die. Perhaps the most famous Stoic practice is memento mori. Remember that you will die. At first this sounds dark. It's actually deeply life-affirming. When you truly remember that life is finite, many worries suddenly shrink. That awkward haircut, that grey hair, that receding hairline. Will any of it matter in 100 years? Probably not. What will matter? The people you loved, the kindness you showed, the courage you displayed, the integrity with which you lived. Death has a remarkable way of revealing what was always important. The Stoics didn't think about death to become depressed. They thought about death to stop wasting life. Final reflection. There's an old saying, often attributed to Stoic thinking: the obstacle is the way. In other words, the very thing you believed is holding you back may become the thing that sets you free. Perhaps boldness is one of those obstacles, not because losing hair is pleasant, but because it forces a question many people spend their entire lives avoiding. Who am I when appearances begin to fade? It's a question even one of us must answer eventually. Every one of us must answer eventually, because time asks it of us all, whether through grey hair, wrinkles, illness, or simply the passing years. Nature gradually removes everything we once believed defines us. The Stoics invite us to begin preparing long before nature forces the lesson. Build a character stronger than your appearance, a confidence deeper than compliments, a peace that criticism cannot disturb, a purpose that aging cannot diminish. Because here's the remarkable truth. History has forgotten the hairstyles of most great people, but it has remembered their courage, it has remembered their wisdom, it has remembered their compassion, it has remembered their integrity. No one studies Marcus Aurelius because how he looked. They study him because of how he lived. No one admires Epictetus because he possessed wealth or beauty. They admire him because he discovered freedom while owning almost nothing. Perhaps that's the greatest lesson a bold head can teach us. Not that appearance doesn't matter at all, but that it should never matter more than the person beneath it. So whether you decide to shave your head tomorrow or never touch a razor, remember this. Every morning when you look into the mirror, you're faced with two choices. You can spend the day improving the reflection, or you can spend the day improving the person doing the looking. The Stoics would tell us that only one of those investments continues to pay dividends for the rest of our lives. Thank you for watching. If this video gave you a new perspective on Stoicism, or perhaps even on yourself, consider sharing it with someone who might benefit from this timeless wisdom. And if you'd like to explore more practical lessons from Stoicism, ancient philosophy, and modern psychology, be sure to subscribe and like the video. Until next time, remember, hair may change with time, character is built by choice, and in the end, the strongest man isn't the one who keeps his hair, it's the one who never loses himself.